Look at your surname. If it starts with an apostrophe and an O, or with Mac, someone in your family history fought to keep it, or fought generations later to get it back. Because for close to 300 years, wearing a visibly Irish name was a liability under English rule. The O meant grandson of, the Mac meant son of. Together, they were a memory device, a genealogy you could speak aloud, sometimes running back 1,000 years to a named king. Under the penal laws and the plain economics of finding work with an English-speaking administration, families dropped them. Some clawed them back in the 19th century's Gaelic revival. Many quietly and permanently never did. Tonight, 10 Irish surnames, each descending from a specific kingdom, a specific dynasty. And the story of how they lost everything and carried the name anyway. Number 10, Blarney, the Welshman. Here's the trick of a countdown that promises kings. Walsh isn't descended from a Gaelic dynasty at all. It's the opposite. When Strongbow's Anglo-Norman invasion landed in 1170, it brought with it soldiers from Wales, Cornwall and Cumbria, men the Irish simply called the Welsh, not caring to distinguish one flavour of invader from another. That collective label became a surname, and the families who carried it did something almost nobody expected of an occupying force. They went native. Within a few generations, the Walshes were marrying into Irish families, speaking Irish, and fighting alongside the very kingdoms their ancestors had arrived to help subdue. Today, Walsh is the fourth most common surname in all of Ireland, thickest in County Mayo and County Kilkenny, precisely the regions where those Cambro-Norman soldiers first put down roots. It's a smaller name in America, ranked only in the low 200s, because so much of the Walsh immigration stayed closer to home, in Britain and Australia, rather than crossing the Atlantic in the numbers the famine-era names did. An invader's name. Now, one of the most Irish names there is. Number 9. Mac Garalt in Irish, though the name itself is pure Norman, son of Gerald, after Gerald of Windsor, constable of Pembroke Castle in Wales. The Fitzgeralds split into two great houses, the Earls of Kildare in the east and the Earls of Desmond in the southwest, ruling out of Cork and Kerry. And the Desmond Fitzgeralds did something that scandalised English observers for 2 centuries. They went further than the Walshes ever did. They patronised Irish poets, spoke Irish at home, fostered their children with Gaelic families, and fought the English crown itself when it suited them. A 17th century Irish historian coined the phrase that's followed them since, Hiberni oris Hibernis ipsis, more Irish than the Irish themselves. It cost them. In 1534, Silken Thomas Fitzgerald, heir to Kildare, rose in open rebellion against Henry VIII. It ended with Thomas and 5 of his uncles executed at Tyburn, and the Fitzgeralds' power broken for a generation. 3 centuries later, an ordinary Fitzgerald family from the village of Bruff in County Limerick, no documented link to the noble line, just farmers, left during the famine years for Boston. Their descendant, John Honey Fitzgerald, became its mayor. His grandson became President of the United States. That's the honest version. Not a king's bloodline reaching the White House, but a famine immigrants, which is arguably the better story. Number 8. Uí Maine. Descendant of Rian. We'll be straight with you. Nobody actually knows what Rian meant. Older sources will tell you it's connected to the Irish word for king. Modern scholarship has discounted that. It may simply be a personal name whose original sense is lost. What is documented is the sept. Uí Maine held lordship over Idrone, the barony of Idrone in County Carlow, from at least the 10th century, with a related branch, the Uí Maine, ruling the territory of Owney straddling Limerick and Tipperary. These weren't high kings. They were regional lords, Taoiseach, holding a patch of ground, and a following through the long medieval centuries before the English conquest reached them. It's a smaller story than the ones either side of it, and we're not going to inflate it. What Ryan lacks in dynastic drama, it makes up in sheer persistence. It's one of the most common surnames carried out of Ireland during the 19th century, concentrated overwhelmingly in Tipperary, Carlow and Limerick to this day, and one of the most common Irish surnames in the United States. Number 7. O Sullivan. And here's another one we won't oversell. Even genealogists disagree on what it means. Sul is eye. That part's certain. The rest is guesswork. One-eyed, hawk-eyed, or possibly dark-eyed. Pick your favourite. Nobody has proven any of them. What's certain is the geography. Pushed out of their original lands near Cashel by the 12th century Norman advance, the O'Sullivan set resettled in the far southwest, splitting into O'Sullivan Moor and O'Sullivan Bear, the second branch taking the wild mountainous Beara Peninsula on the Cork-Kerry border. And it's the Bear branch that gives this name its single most devastating chapter. After the Irish and Spanish defeat at the Battle of Kinsale in 1601, English forces destroyed the O'Sullivan Bear stronghold at Dunboy. On the 31st of December 1602, their chief, Donald Cam O'Sullivan Bear, led roughly 1,000 of his people, 400 fighting men, 600 women, children and servants, on a 500-kilometre winter march north to safety in Leitrim, through 6 counties of hostile territory. They arrived on the 4th of January 1603. 35 of the original 1,000 were still alive. It is one of the starkest single facts in this entire episode, and it happened to the ancestors of a name that today sits among the most common Irish surnames in America, Britain and Australia. Number 6. MacCarthy, son of Carthage. The sons of Moradach MacCarthy adopted the surname when he died in 1092, and by 1118 a treaty splitting the kingdom of Munster in two made Teig MacCarthy the first king of Desmond, the western Munster kingdom covering much of modern Cork and Kerry. The McCarthys held that kingdom in one form or another for over 300 years. Their most famous physical legacy still stands: Blarney Castle, built around 1446 by Cormac Lardair McCarthy, Lord of Muskerry. And here's a legend versus record moment worth flagging honestly. The story that the Blarney Stone was a gift from Robert the Bruce, in gratitude for McCarthy's support at Bannockburn in 1314, is folklore layered on top of a real castle built over a century later. Kiss the stone if you like, just don't mistake the story for the history. Cork was also one of the great famine-era ports of departure, and McCarthy travelled with tens of thousands of others out of Cove, then Queenstown, into Irish-American communities up and down the eastern seaboard. Number 5 is coming. But first, before we get there, number 1 on this list isn't just a surname. It's the family whose departure on one specific night in September of 1607 is often used to mark the actual end of Gaelic Ireland as an aristocratic culture. Stay with us. O Kayali, descendant of Kayal Ak. Even the personal name splits opinion. It may come from Kyle, church, or from a root meaning something closer to bright-headed or warrior. Both readings have their defenders. What's not in dispute is the kingdom. The O'Kellys were the ruling family of Uí Maine, also written Uí Maine, a kingdom in South Connaught spanning what's now East Galway and southern Roscommon, tracing their line to a 9th century ancestor, Celach Macfí Nachta, and the very first man recorded bearing the surname Teig Mór Ó Ciall died fighting on the winning side of the most famous battle in Irish history, Clontarf in 1014, as an ally of the High King, whose own name closes out this list at number 2. Kelly is, by most counts, the second most common surname in Ireland itself, and it travelled to America in matching numbers. Over 250,000 Americans carry it today. Number 4. O Muraha, descendant of Muraha, a name built from words for sea and battle, the sea warrior. And here's a clarification worth making because genealogists get asked this constantly. O Muraha, which becomes Murphy, is not the same lineage as Mac Muraha, which becomes MacMurrough or Kavanagh, the Leinster kings whose feud with a rival dynasty famously invited the Anglo-Norman invasion in. Same personal name, borrowed independently by unrelated families in unrelated centuries. Ireland has at least 3 separate unconnected Murphy septs, in Wexford, in Cork, and in the Sligo-Roscommon borderlands, that all converged on the identical anglicised spelling. What that means in practice, Murphy isn't one dynasty's story, it's the story of how common the name Mor Aha simply was, and that scale shows in the numbers. Griffith's valuation, the mid-19th century property survey, recorded over 13,500 Murphy households, the single most numerous surname in the country. It crossed the Atlantic in matching volume. Murphy remains the most common Irish surname in the United States today, with well over 300,000 bearers, ranking among the 60 most common surnames of any origin in the entire country. Number 3. O'Con O'Cor, descendant of Con O'Var. The O'Connors ruled Connaught for generations, but one of them changes the shape of Irish history entirely. Ruaidhrí O'Con O'Cor, Rory O'Connor, King of Connaught from 1156 and High King of Ireland from 1166. Rory's reign explains why names 9 and 10 on this list exist in Ireland at all. His rival, the deposed King of Leinster, Diarmid mac Murada, sailed to Wales in 1166 to recruit Norman mercenaries to win back his throne, which is precisely how Strongbow's forces and the Walsh and Fitzgerald ancestors riding with them arrived in 1169. Rory spent the rest of his reign trying to push the invasion back into the sea, and failed. He abdicated in 1183, returned to rule briefly twice more, and died in 1198 at Cong in what one contemporary chronicle called exemplary penance, buried at Clonmacnoise. He is remembered plainly as the last High King of Ireland. Everyone who held the title after him held it as a claim, not a reality. Number 2. O'Brien, descendant of Brian. And this Brian needs no last name. Brian Boru, the man who broke a high kingship that had belonged to a single rival dynasty for the better part of 500 years. On Good Friday, the 23rd of April 1014, Brian's forces met an alliance of the Dublin Vikings, the Leinster King, and Norse mercenaries from Orkney and the Isle of Man at Clontarf, just north of Dublin. Brian's army won, but Brian himself, in his late 70s by then, and not personally on the battlefield, was killed in his tent afterward by a small band of fleeing Norsemen. His son Murahad and his grandson Turlock died in the same battle. 3 generations of the family gone in a single day on the day of their greatest victory. The O'Briens went on to rule as Kings of Thomond, based in County Clare, for centuries afterward. Today there are estimated to be over 100,000 O'Briens in America, with especially heavy concentration around Massachusetts, one more Irish name that made its way, generation by generation, into the industrial cities of the American Northeast. Number 1. O'Neill, descendant of Neil. And we need to be careful here, because this is the name where legend and genetics collide, and honesty matters more than drama. The O'Neills trace themselves to Niall of the Nine Hostages, a semi-legendary high king said to have reigned around the turn of the 5th century, and to the wider Uí Maine dynasty that dominated the northern high kingship for centuries after him, making this one of the oldest aristocratic lineages claimed anywhere in Europe. A 2006 Trinity College Dublin genetic study did find a distinctive Y chromosome signature carried by a striking share of men across the northwest of Ireland, enough that researchers estimated 2 to 3 million living descendants worldwide. But we owe you the caveat. The headlines usually drop. The genetic dating of that signature doesn't cleanly line up with Niall's own era, and Niall's existence as a historical individual, rather than a legendary founding figure, has never been proven. Real DNA, an uncertain figure behind it. Both things are true at once. What isn't in doubt is what happened to his descendants at the end. Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, led the 9 Years' War against English conquest from 1593 to 1603, and lost. 4 years later, on the night of the 14th of September 1607, Hugh O'Neill and Rory O'Donnell, the last great lords of Gaelic Ulster, boarded a ship at Rathmullen on Lough Swilly with around 99 followers and sailed for Catholic Europe. They never returned. Historians call it the Flight of the Earls, and it's still used, without much argument, to mark the point where Gaelic Ireland, as a functioning aristocratic order with its own laws, its own poets, its own kings, simply stopped existing. Their lands were resettled by Protestant planters within a few years. The name that once belonged to high kings left Ireland as refugees. It's carried today by ordinary O'Neill families across America, Britain and Ireland, the crown long gone, the name still standing. 10 names, 10 kingdoms. Every one of them ended the same way, not conquered out of existence, but stripped of power and carried forward anyway, across an ocean, in a surname. Drop your surname in the comments below. We research every single one, and the most requested name becomes its own full episode. And if this is the point where you want to go further than one video can take you, tracing your own line county by county, a DNA kit or a subscription through the link in the description is how a lot of our viewers start. We may earn a small commission if you do. It costs you nothing extra, and it helps us keep every episode properly researched. See you in the next one.